Education is the only thing they can't take away from you in prison. Those words kept Marcus Williams alive through 25 years behind bars. 2 life sentences, no possibility of parole. But Marcus had a plan that no one saw coming. Not the guards, not the warden, not even his fellow inmates. Welcome to Still Human. Here we explore the most extraordinary transformations of the human spirit. In this story, you'll witness how one man turned a prison cell into a classroom, and a life sentence into a second chance. This is about redemption, education, and the power of the human mind to transcend any barrier. Before we dive into this incredible journey, tell us where you're watching from today. Which city? Which country? Share in the comments. We love connecting with our global community. And if you believe in the power of second chances and human transformation, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because every day we share stories that prove it's never too late to change your life. June 15th, 1998. Marcus Williams was 19 years old when the judge read his sentence, 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon. The prosecutor called him a menace to society. The judge called him irredeemable. Marcus called it the first day of his real education. Sitting in that courtroom, handcuffed and facing forever behind bars, most people would have given up. Most people would have let the system swallow them whole. But, as Marcus later wrote in his Harvard thesis, rock bottom became the foundation I built my life upon. The crime itself was as senseless as it was devastating. A convenience store robbery gone wrong. Marcus, desperate for drug money and running with the wrong crowd, had made a split-second decision that would define the next quarter-century of his life. The store clerk, a 58-year-old father of 3, survived, but was permanently disabled. It was a moment of violence that Marcus would spend every day trying to atone for. But this isn't a story about the crime. This is a story about what happened next. Because on that first night in Millfield Correctional Facility, as Marcus lay on a thin mattress in a 6x8 cell, he made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't going to just survive prison. He was going to transform it into something else entirely. The first person to plant the seed was an unlikely mentor, Robert Chen, a 67-year-old inmate serving time for white-collar fraud. Chen had been a professor at State University before his fall from grace, and he noticed something in Marcus that others missed. "You're angry," Chen told Marcus during their third conversation in the prison library. "But you're angry at the right things. You're angry at ignorance. You're angry at the system that failed you. You're angry at yourself. That anger can destroy you, or you can use it as fuel." "Fuel for what?" Marcus asked. The Millfield Correctional Library was a joke. 50 books, half of them paperback novels from the 1980s. The other half, outdated textbooks that had been donated by schools that were throwing them away. But it became Marcus's Harvard. He started with the basics. Marcus had dropped out of high school at 16, so he began with GED preparation books, math, science, history, English. Subjects he'd ignored as a teenager suddenly became lifelines. He studied for 8 to 10 hours a day, treating education like a full-time job. The other inmates thought he was crazy. "You think reading books is going to get you out of here?" they'd laugh. "You got life, Williams. Ain't no amount of studying going to change that." But Marcus wasn't studying to get out. He was studying to get into a different version of himself. By year 2, Marcus had earned his GED with the highest scores in the prison's history. But that was just the beginning. He convinced the warden to let him order college-level textbooks through the prison's limited educational fund. When that ran out, he used his own money from the prison commissary job that paid 25 cents an hour. The breakthrough came in year 3 when Marcus wrote a letter to Dr. Patricia Morrison, a law professor at the State University. The letter was 15 pages long, handwritten in perfect cursive, and contained a legal analysis of his own case that was so sophisticated that Dr. Morrison initially thought it was a hoax. "Education," Chen replied simply. "It's the only thing they can't take away from you in here. I am writing to you not as an inmate seeking sympathy," Marcus had written, "but as a student seeking knowledge. I have discovered that law is not just about rules and regulations. It is about justice, fairness, and the possibility of redemption. I would like to learn from you, if you would be willing to teach me." Dr. Morrison drove 3 hours to Millfield Correctional to meet this mysterious student. What she found was a 22-year-old man who could discuss constitutional law with the sophistication of a graduate student, despite having never set foot in a college classroom. "Marcus had an intuitive understanding of legal principles that I'd never seen before," Dr. Morrison later recalled. "He understood law not as an abstract concept, but as something that had directly impacted his life. That gave him insights that classroom students often lack." Dr. Morrison became Marcus's first unofficial professor. She sent him law school textbooks, legal cases to analyze, and writing assignments that she graded as rigorously as any university student's work. Word spread through the academic community about the inmate who was teaching himself law. Soon, other professors began corresponding with Marcus. Dr. James Patterson from the philosophy department, Dr. Sarah Kim from criminal justice, Dr. Michael But the real test came in year 7, when Marcus decided to take the most audacious step of his prison education. He was going to write and submit a legal brief to an actual court case. The case was State v. Jackson, a criminal appeal that was working its way through the state court system. The defendant, like Marcus, was a young man who had been sentenced to life without parole for a crime committed as a teenager. Marcus saw parallels in their cases and believed he'd found a constitutional argument that the defendant's lawyers had missed. Working 12 hours a day for 6 months, Marcus crafted a 47-page legal brief, arguing that life sentences without parole for juvenile offenders violated the 8th Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. The brief was a masterpiece of legal reasoning, citing hundreds of cases and constitutional precedents. The problem was, Marcus wasn't a lawyer. He had no standing to submit the brief to the court. So he did something unprecedented. He sent it to the defendant's attorney with a note, saying, "I believe this argument could save your client's life. Please use it however you see fit." Defense attorney Linda Rodriguez was skeptical when she received the brief from a prison. But as she read Marcus's argument, she realized she was looking at legal work that surpassed anything her law firm had produced. It was brilliant, Rodriguez later testified. This inmate had identified a constitutional argument that our entire legal team had missed. We immediately incorporated his reasoning into our appeal. The case went to the state Supreme Court. The defendant won. Life sentence overturned. Marcus Williams, prisoner number 847291, had successfully argued a case before the state's highest court without ever leaving his cell. News of Marcus's legal victory spread quickly through legal circles. Law professors began reaching out, offering to include him in correspondence courses. Legal journals requested articles. Marcus was becoming a legal scholar, despite being locked away from the world. But Marcus's appetite for learning went far beyond law. He taught himself Spanish, then French, then Mandarin. He studied philosophy, reading everyone from Aristotle to Nietzsche. He dove into psychology, economics, and literature. His cell became a makeshift university library, stacked floor to ceiling with books. The transformation was so complete that even the prison guards began treating Marcus differently. He wasn't just another inmate, recalled Correctional Officer James Murphy. Marcus was like having a professor in the cell block. Other inmates would bring... It was an impossible dream. Harvard doesn't accept students who are serving life sentences. But Marcus had learned something important during his years of self-education. Impossible is just another word for no one has done it yet. In year 15 of his sentence, Marcus wrote the letter that would change everything. The letter arrived at Harvard Law School on official Millfield correctional letterhead. Dean Margaret Foster initially assumed it was some kind of mistake. Inmates don't apply to Harvard. But this wasn't exactly an application. It was something else entirely. Dear Dean Foster, the letter began. I am writing to propose an educational experiment that I believe could benefit both Harvard Law School and the criminal justice system. I am currently serving a life sentence, but I am also a self-taught legal scholar who has spent the past 15 years transforming my incarceration into education. What followed was a 12-page proposal that took Dean Foster's breath away. Marcus wasn't asking to be admitted as a traditional student. He was proposing to create the first ever prison-based legal education program with himself as both student and case study. I believe that education is rehabilitation, Marcus wrote, not just for me, but for the hundreds of inmates who could benefit from the same opportunities I've created for myself. I'm proposing a partnership between Harvard Law School and the correctional system to prove that even those who have made the gravest mistakes can become productive contributors to society. Marcus included samples of his legal writing, recommendations from professors who had worked with him, and testimonials from inmates whose cases he had helped with. Most importantly, he included a detailed curriculum for what he called the Prison to Professor Pipeline, a program that could transform other inmates the way education had transformed him. Dean Foster called an emergency faculty meeting. I've been in legal education for 30 years, she told her colleagues. I have never seen anything like this. This inmate has essentially created his own law school behind bars, and he's proposing that we make it official. The Harvard faculty was divided. Some saw Marcus's proposal as groundbreaking. Others worried about the precedent of partnering with a convicted felon. The debate raged for months. The turning point came when Dr. Patricia Morrison, Marcus's first academic mentor, was invited to speak to the Harvard faculty. She brought with her 15 years of correspondence with Marcus, examples. The vote was close. 23 in favor, 19 against. Marcus Williams was going to Harvard. Of course, Marcus couldn't physically attend Harvard. He was still serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. But Harvard had agreed to something unprecedented. They would create the first ever distance learning program specifically designed for incarcerated students, with Marcus as its inaugural participant and eventual instructor. The program was called Justice Inside, and it was revolutionary. Marcus would complete his law degree through correspondence, video conferences, and intensive summer sessions where Harvard professors would visit the prison. Upon completion, he would become the program's first instructor, teaching other inmates while completing his doctoral work. The media attention was intense. "Criminal gets Harvard degree," read the negative headlines. "Education transforms life prisoner," read the positive ones. Marcus tried to ignore both. "I'm not doing this for headlines," he wrote in his journal. "I'm doing this because education saved my life, and I believe it can save others." The coursework was rigorous. Marcus was held to the same standards as any Harvard student, perhaps even higher ones. His professors graded him blind, not knowing which papers came from the inmate and which came from traditional students. Marcus consistently scored in the top 10% of his class. But the real magic happened when Marcus began teaching. The first Justice Inside class had 12 inmate students. All were serving long sentences. All had dropped out of high school. All were skeptical that education could change anything about their situation. Marcus understood their skepticism because he had felt it too. "The first thing you need to understand," Marcus told his students, "is that we're not studying law to get out of prison. We're studying law to get into ourselves, to understand why we're here, how the system works, and how we can use that knowledge to become better men." The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, Marcus's students were writing legal briefs, helping other inmates with their cases, and most importantly, seeing themselves differently. They weren't just prisoners anymore. They were students, scholars, thinkers. Word spread throughout the correctional system. Other prisons wanted to implement the Justice Inside program. Other inmates wanted to follow Marcus's path. Universities beyond Harvard began reaching out. By year 20 of his sentence, Marcus Williams had become something unprecedented, a Harvard professor serving a life sentence. The impact of Marcus's transformation extended far beyond the prison walls. The Justice Inside program had grown to include 500 inmates across 15 states. "For forgiving me, for believing that people can change, for showing me that redemption is possible." "You showed yourself that," Daniel replied. "I just watched it happen." Today, Professor Marcus Williams teaches at Harvard Law School and runs Justice Inside programs in 50 states. He has helped over 2,000 inmates earn college degrees, and his research on prison education has transformed criminal justice policy across the country. But Marcus still remembers the words that changed his life. "Education is the only thing they can't take away from you in prison." He was wrong about one thing, though. They couldn't take away his education, but they also couldn't contain it. Marcus's transformation proved that the human capacity for change is unlimited, even in the most limiting circumstances. At Still Human, we believe every person has the capacity for transformation. Sometimes it takes a prison cell to find a classroom. Sometimes it takes rock bottom to build a foundation. And sometimes the most powerful professors are the ones who learn their lessons the hard way. What impossible dream are you working toward? Share your journey in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell.
Because every day we share stories that prove it's never too late to change your life.
See you in the next story.
Marcus had written 2 books, Letters from Cell Block Harvard, and Education as Rehabilitation. Both became bestsellers and required reading in criminal justice programs across the country. "Prison didn't rehabilitate me," Marcus wrote in his Harvard doctoral thesis. "Education did." The question isn't whether people can change. The question is whether we give them the tools to change. The victim of Marcus's original crime, store clerk Daniel Rodriguez, had followed Marcus's journey through news reports. In year 22 of Marcus's sentence, Daniel did something extraordinary. He wrote to Marcus, "I want you to know that I've forgiven you," Daniel wrote. "Not because time has healed all wounds, but because I've seen what you've become. You've turned your mistake into meaning. You've used your pain to prevent others from feeling the same pain you caused me. That takes courage." The correspondence between Marcus and Daniel continued for months. Eventually, Daniel became one of the most vocal supporters of the Justice Inside program. If Marcus Williams can transform his life from behind bars, Daniel testified before the state legislature, imagine what other inmates could accomplish with the same opportunities. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in Marcus himself. The angry 19-year-old who had committed armed robbery was gone. In his place was a 44-year-old man who had found purpose in the most unlikely circumstances. By year 25, Marcus had earned his Harvard Law degree, his doctorate in criminal justice, and had been named Harvard's first ever professor in residence at a correctional facility. He was teaching courses that were broadcast to Harvard's campus via video conference, with students on both sides of the camera. In 2023, after 25 years behind bars, something unprecedented happened. Marcus Williams received a commutation of his sentence, not because of legal technicalities or political connections, but because he had become living proof that rehabilitation was possible. The commutation was supported by Harvard Law School, the victim of his original crime, the families of inmates he had helped educate, and dozens of legal scholars who argued that Marcus's transformation demonstrated the possibility of redemption. Marcus Williams entered prison as a criminal, wrote Harvard Dean Margaret Foster in her letter to the parole board. He is leaving as one of the most important legal minds of his generation. But Marcus's